Welcome to Readings from Roberto, bringing you the wisdom and experience of Roberto Assagioli and Psychosynthesis through readings of his essays and lectures. We hope you enjoy this and gain a benefit that can be shared with others. Psychosynthesis, Its Essential Components, by Roberto Assagioli. This is document number 24288 in the Assagioli Archives in Florence. Read by Jan Kuniholm. Before describing what psychosynthesis is, its principles and techniques, I think it would be well to speak about its place and function in the present predicament of humanity, and the rapid changes occurring at present. I think that in a general way, one can say that these changes and the consequent problems and crises have been produced by three great events. One, the first event, is the release of repressed or ignored emotional energies and vital drives. This was started and effected chiefly by psychoanalysis, and I don't need to dwell on it because it is a well-known fact. But lately, this release has taken more widespread and intense manifestations. As you know, there are many trends which emphasize the free and uncontrolled expression of whatever is in the conscious and in the unconscious. 2. The second and more recent event has been the discovery, or rather the rediscovery, and growing interest in the unrealized latent potential energies in the human psyche. These energies can be compared with the atomic energy in physics. And now there is a widespread movement which emphasizes this, and endeavors and promises to show how to realize and activate these energies. 3. The third event, connected with the second, is the active exploration and interest in inner space. This has a strict analogy with space flights. These last two events are connected but different. One is discovery of potent psychic energies and the attempt to bring into the human personality something which was dormant. The other is instead the active widening and expansion of consciousness and the reaching up to unrealized levels of awareness and life. These are also named in a general way as altered states of consciousness. These trends present great possibilities of enhancing human life, but also great dangers. Also here the analogy with atomic energy is suggestive, and such dangers and damages are evident and create serious concern. The outstanding example is that of the energies released by psychedelics and drugs in general. One can use the example of the story of Goethe, the sorcerer's apprentice. He has been given by his master the secret to arouse currents of water, but not that of stopping them at will or controlling them. The result was that he was almost drowned by the waters if the master had not intervened. Another way of putting this fact is that inner space now is stormed by reckless adventurers without proper preparation and caution. Anyhow, these strong trends cannot be suppressed or repressed and should not be. The problem is the use of safe methods for regulating them, directing them toward positive achievements, and preventing as much as possible the bad results. It could be called in general the mastering of the inrush of the previously latent energies, their assimilation, and their integration into the personality. Well, this is exactly the purpose and usefulness of psychosynthesis. I had been one of the very first to introduce psychoanalysis in Italy as far back as 1907. I prepared my doctoral thesis on psychoanalysis in 1909 at the Zurich Insane Asylum, the head of which was then Professor Bleuler, the author of the classical treatise on schizophrenia. I participated to the historical meeting in Nuremberg, where the first outer split between Jung and Freud occurred. Freud himself used the word psychosynthesis to indicate the reunion of dissociated parts of the psyche. Freud also talked about the process of sublimation, and in his book Über Psychoanalyse, published in 1910, he states that the elements of the sexual instinct are characterized by a capacity for sublimation, for changing their sexual aim into another of a different kind and socially more worthy. To the sum of energies thus gained from our psychological productions, we probably owe the highest results of our culture. This process of sublimation applied not only to sexual drives but also to others, and particularly to the aggressive drives, has been later developed in psychosynthesis as one of its chief techniques. Thus, psychosynthesis was gradually developed by me on the basis of psychoanalysis. I shall now mention some of the chief characteristics of psychosynthesis. First of all, psychosynthesis, while including a large amount of techniques, should not be considered as an eclecticism. It has a definite pattern, as will be apparent from the following points. In the first place, the existential problem of each individual is given the chief emphasis, and a plan of treatment is organized with the aim of solving it. Psychosynthesis includes the use of all valid analytical techniques, from the basic ones used by Freud, free association and the analysis of dreams, to other developments such as free drawing, spontaneous writing, guided imagery, and so on. Second, the use of active techniques for the integration of the personality. Third, techniques for activating latent potentialities existing in the higher levels of the unconscious. Fourth, techniques for the transmutation and sublimation of psychic energies, which can be considered as psychodynamics, or dynamic psychology in the strict sense, or psychoenergetics. Among some of the special techniques used, I can mention that of right proportions. A good example of this was used by Theodore Roosevelt, as quoted by his friend Beebe. He said, "At Sagamore Hill, Theodore Roosevelt and I used to play a little game together. After an evening of talk, we would go out on the lawn and search the skies until we found the faint spot of light mist beyond the lower left-hand corner of the great square of Pegasus. Then, one or the other of us would recite, 'That is the spiral galaxy in Andromeda. It is as large as our Milky Way. It is one of 100 million galaxies. It consists of 100 million billion suns, each larger than our sun.' Then Roosevelt would grin at me and say, 'Now I think we're small enough. Let's go to bed.'" Then also, humor, in its higher connotation as a compassionate but objective view of human foibles, is a technique of psychosynthesis. It is connoted as smiling wisdom. In the treatment, 3 orientations are taken into account: the past, the present, and the future. These are not mutually exclusive, and the aim is their combination in right proportions in each case, but the emphasis is put on the present. As one writer said, "Past, present, and future are blended in the inclusiveness of the moment that is." That also means that the short, middle, and long-range views are taken into proper account. An illuminating analogy of this is that of climbing of a mountain. It is necessary, first of all, to have a clear view of the summit, of the goal to be reached. Then also the various ways and paths of the ascent should be considered. But when starting to climb, one must put one's attention on the immediate steps which are taken, in order not to stumble. Mountain climbing illustrates also the importance given in psychosynthesis to those which have been called by Maslow the further reaches of human nature. Psychosynthesis endeavors to deal with attempts for expansion of consciousness, for having peak experiences, ecstatic states, and this is a trend that is rapidly spreading at present. It concerns the exploration of the higher unconscious, or superconscious, called aptly with the neutral term of transpersonal. While psychosynthesis takes in consideration and favors the occurrence of such experiences, its chief usefulness is that of dealing with what happens individually after one has had such peak experiences. Peak experiences are only momentary, and then the consciousness descends again to the ordinary level, and sometimes even below it. A peak experience might be compared to a temporary flight to the top of the mountain, but one cannot remain there. Instead, what can be done is, after having returned to the plains, to gradually and carefully climb, step by step, the mountain, and in this climb there are certain spaces or plateaus where one can dwell for a while and sometimes remain there without further climbing. It can be compared with the exploration of space made by astronauts, and several writers have spoken of exploring inner space. One point to which psychosynthesis gives special emphasis is the difference between the various levels of the superconscious or transpersonal and the highest point, the self. This is illustrated by the following diagram. See the diagram on the web page. The experiences of the superconscious and of the self have not been generally enough differentiated and defined, even by psychologists dealing with the transpersonal realm. I cannot now deal with that except by saying that, while in the superconscious region, many psychological activities are going on and psychological functions are active, the self, instead, is a firm point of awareness, which is stable, unchanging, in a sense transcendent, although it emanates powerful energies which can be compared to the radiations of a star or the sun. I shall only mention the question of the relation between the individual and the universal self. On this point particularly, psychosynthesis takes no theoretical position, but sticks to the existential experience of the individual. Here it is necessary to emphasize that psychosynthesis is essentially empirical. It is based on the description and interpretation of existential experiences, and therefore it has no specific theoretical setting. It is independent from and neutral towards any philosophical or theological framework, but it can fit in most of them. Thus it has been accepted with favor by people as different as a Jesuit father, Reverend C. Bryant, a Protestant minister, Reverend O. Brandon, and a follower of Vedanta, J.P. Atreya. One of the fields in which psychosynthesis gives special attention is the interplay of the various drives, and particularly the relationship between sex and self-assertion. This indicates the necessity of dealing with interpersonal and group relations, and consequently with the achievement of interpersonal, group, and social psychosynthesis. This goes from the psychosynthesis of man and woman, the psychosynthesis of the couple, to the psychosynthesis of the family as a psychological unit, and then in ever-widening groups towards the ideal of psychosynthesis of humanity. Therefore, psychosynthesis should not be considered only as a therapy, but it has wide applications in self-actualization and in education, both in the family and in school of all levels. We also have to give the recognition and see the importance of collective influences and their dangers. It is not enough realized how much these psychic currents or waves, and what might be called psychic smog, affects each and all of us. Also, this requires right handling, individual and collective. One might call it a psychological ecology. Psychosynthesis is a scientific conception and practice. Therefore, it follows scientific method and procedure, understanding science in a broad sense, as some of the present scientists do, such as Maslow and others. It is an open-minded conception, based on fact, on careful observation and experimentation, with a variety of techniques. More than 40 are listed in my book, without any preconceived preference for one or the other. Psychosynthesis starts on the sound common-sense premise that before dealing with the unknown and potent energies, one has to know well and deal successfully with the normal energies of the personality. Moreover, while the trends toward transcendence of which I have spoken are widespread and are growing, there is a great mass of humanity, one might say the majority of human beings, which doesn't participate in those trends. Either they ignore them, or are skeptical about them, or are afraid of them. Their need is to cope with personality problems, interpersonal relationships, and the social setting, and I think that to deal with that successfully is already much. Psychosynthesis started as a comprehensive method of psychotherapy of the average neurotic or ill-adjusted person. It is a large field which is on the same level of other scientific psychotherapies. But psychosynthesis did not stop at that. It recognized the other trends and problems mentioned, and endeavored to meet their different problems and needs. One might say that there are 4 stages. First, psychoanalysis, which deals with the lower and middle unconscious, and this is needed in all cases. The second is humanistic psychology, which has recognized the existential problems of humanity which have not been sufficiently considered by academic psychology. Third, transpersonal psychology, which deals with higher needs and what Maslow aptly called the further reaches of human nature. Fourth, the attempt of achieving a synthesis, that is, to coordinate and unite these 3 levels in a harmonious whole, and to use techniques suited for all the stages. The techniques used in psychosynthesis include meditation in its widest sense, which comprises also the use of imagination and its enormous power, and the awakening of the intuition. Some of the Eastern techniques are also included because in the East, and especially in India, the attention and interest and valuation of the inner worlds was outstanding. But I think that their adoption, as they are, to the present Western mentality and conditions is not only difficult, but might have at times undesirable results. Therefore, psychosynthesis works at the adaptation and modification which we think more suitable to take advantage of the positive contribution of Eastern approaches, but in the framework of the present personality and social existential reality. Moreover, I think that meditation can be more valid and effective if combined with other psychological and therapeutic techniques, not as an isolated technique, but as a combination with all others. The practical procedures in a psychosynthetic treatment or training is, first, proper mental preparation and information, wise and unbiased, in order to avoid one-sided use of any technique. Second, a gradual procedure by installments, so to say, a gradual assimilation of the transpersonal contents and energies and insights into the normal personality. This is very important because it outsets the danger produced by the inrush of energies in those who are not prepared to handle them. Third, a gradual training in all this. An analogy with the building of a house, although oversimplified, can be of help here. A house must be built from the basis, have strong foundations and good sewage, but then one can and must build successive stories. The first task can be analogous to psychoanalysis. The second is that of the use of active techniques of self-development or self-actualization. But then come the upper stories and the terrace. The trouble with buildings is that generally they are covered with limiting roofs and not with a terrace. But terraces have important functions. They offer during the day opportunities for sunbathing and receiving the sun's vivifying and healing radiations, and by night for contemplating and exploring the sky, both with naked eye and with telescopes. The foundation and the basement, the psychoanalytical aspect, are necessary, but they are not sufficient. On the other hand, there are those who try to live on the upper levels and focus their life only on those, and it is like trying to live on a terrace up in the air without the rest of the building underneath. Transpersonal experiences are of two kinds. Those aiming to favor the elevation of the center of personal consciousness, of the I, to the self, of which it is a reflection, and those favoring the descent of energies from the transpersonal realm to the normal personal level. They include meditative techniques, taken in their broadest sense, and techniques for inspiration and creativity. The aim of psychosynthesis is the difficult task of bringing about our harmonious integration of the transpersonal experiences with the rest of the normal personality, conscious and unconscious. There is much evidence that the breaking through into higher levels of awareness, or the inrush of energies from the superconscious, often create disturbances in the average personality, disturbances which may cause serious troubles reaching up to psychotic symptoms. A special technique developed and used in psychosynthesis is the right use of the will, not as imposition as is generally considered, but as a directing, regulating, and synthesizing function. I shall not say more about it on this occasion, as it is a large subject. I have written a book dealing with the various kinds of will, with its 8 chief qualities, and with the 6 stages of the act of willing, a book which was published in 1973 by Viking Press, entitled The Act of Will. I should like to mention another point to which psychosynthesis gives a special emphasis. This would be called differential procedure. It is based on the recognition of the great differences existing between psychological types and between single individuals. These have been studied, but not enough importance has been given in practice to this fact, both in psychotherapy and in education. Differential procedure consists of 2 stages. First, the recognition of individual types. There are various directions of the libido, or vital interest, which are not only towards the external or the inner worlds, that is, extroversion and introversion, but also upwards or downwards, supraversion and infraversion, and towards the past or the future, past or future orientation. But those who have studied these classifications and labelings are often apt to give them too much importance. Beyond the types, or within them, there are what have been called ideographic diversities, which make each individual a unique being. This has been well emphasized by Allport and Maslow. There is not only the uniqueness of the individual constitution, but uniqueness of individual situation in the environment, and the interplay between these two uniquenesses makes a very complex situation in each case. So, in psychosynthesis, we take full account of this. In a sense, we may say that we try to create a new method for each individual. That is, a new original combination and succession of techniques adapted for his specific situation and needs. Finally, I shall remark that up to now I have spoken of therapeutic psychosynthesis because psychosynthesis evolved as a psychotherapeutic method and is used as a psychotherapeutic procedure. But it doesn't limit itself to that. It starts from the fact, obvious but not sufficiently recognized, that nobody is 100% ill and nobody is 100% healthy. In general, the medical mental attitude is to fight the illness. An average doctor thinks it's his duty to first diagnose an illness, then cure it with powerful drugs. Instead, there is the tradition, originated with Hippocrates, which puts the emphasis on the healing properties of nature, of the body, and considers therapy as helping and cooperating with the vital forces of the organism to overcome the trouble which partially affects it. For instance, a wound is not healed by a doctor. The wound is healed, and reconstruction of the muscular fibers and other tissues is done by the wonderful healing activity of the organism. What the doctor can do is to put the organism in the best condition for that. That is, avoiding infections, protecting the wounded part, giving substance which enhances the vitality, such as vitamins, and so on. This same attitude can be taken in approaching psychological symptoms, and it makes a revolution in medical mentality. It is a quite different attitude to the problem of illness. It is not a patient which has to be diagnosed and cured as patient, but it is a human being who has to be helped to get rid of the partial disturbance in his biological and psychological life. From this, important consequences come, that is, that the methods for dealing with disturbances are equally valid for self-development, increasing efficiency, and the enhancement of the normal personality, and they are just as valid in the educational field, that is, in helping the child, the adolescent, and the young to grow psychologically in sane ways and utilize at best their developing potentialities. Summing up, perhaps the most important contribution of psychosynthesis to the human problems outstanding at present is the transmutation and creative utilization of the aggressive drives, the exploration and conquest of the inner space, and the mutual understanding and integration and cooperation between the sexes. Psychosynthesis had a slow development, but during the last few years it has spread rapidly and widely. There are institutes, foundations, and centers of psychosynthesis in Italy, in the United States, Canada, France, Switzerland, Greece, and India. The present problem and urgent task in psychosynthesis is the training of therapists and educators to meet the rapidly increasing need and demands for competent therapists and educators. This means training through didactic psychosynthesis. Thank you for listening to Readings from Roberto, and we hope you will tune in to our next reading. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to share the wisdom.